Hey everybody, I've got such a fun video for you today because Brendan and I are talking about how BMW needs to return to the design language, the ethos of the 1980s, which in my opinion was the heyday of the company. And to demonstrate why these cars are so fantastic, we've brought along our 1987 M535 E28 5 Series. This is a phenomenal car which can still be had for very affordably, and this car is for sale right now over at TFLbids.com. It's up for auction and we'll tell you a little bit about its condition and why these are such fantastic values. So what I'm going to do is take the camera, and Brendan and I are going to talk a little bit about the design of these old Beamers. And Brendan, what do you think of the design?
I think this is a timeless classic. It doesn't get any better than the second Gen 5 series in my opinion, because I really like how the front end kind of sticks out a little bit further and then kind of slopes downward. It's just such a unique, almost shark-nosed design that really was iconic for BMW and really set a trend for them going forward.
Absolutely, and especially the front end language on these old E28s is just fantastic with the 4 headlights and then the small center mounted kidney grille. And what's cool about this car is that this was actually a foreign market car, never sold here in the US. And what that meant is you didn't get the sealed beam standard units that we got in the States. You actually got this asymmetrical design where the outside units are a little bit larger than the inside. And then you get kind of this brow, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, and I think in the States we also had different crash standards from overseas, so our bumpers stuck out a little further and I think kind of ruined the look of this 5 Series. So to get one with the standard like European or Asian style bumper on it is definitely preferable in my opinion.
Now let's talk about the E28. So this is a model that was kind of synonymous with BMW in the 1980s. And this one's a little bit unusual. It's a car we never got brand new here in the States. This is called the M535. And what is this?
So this is basically, they took the 535, which has the same engine and same transmission as that 535, but they gave it the body kit of the M5, and they gave it the what would they call it? M-Tronic?
M-Technic.
M-Technic suspension and M-Technic steering wheel. So it was a much better handling machine and a much better looking machine than just the standard 5 Series.
So here's kind of the idea, right? Nowadays, we all know about the M Sport lines, like the M340i, right? The M550, which have a lot of the soul of the full-blown M cars, but are missing, for example, the engine. Well, BMW did that all the way back in the 1980s, really starting with this car. This was kind of the origin of that. Now, the M brand didn't have the cachet here in the US that it had in other markets, so BMW didn't feel that at the time it was worth bringing the M package over in the M535. Now, this is actually a Japanese market car, right?
Yeah, it is. So normally these you would think they'd be right-hand drive because it's a Japanese style Japanese market car, but I think you mentioned in another video that it was actually pretty, what was it, a status symbol if you had a left-hand drive vehicle. So they actually sold these as a left-hand drive car for the status.
It was really prestigious, exactly, to have your steering wheel on the left in Japan in the 80s, especially with a German car. But this is in fact a Japanese market car. So you see Osaka BMW Club in the back, BMW Japan Corp here, which is fantastic. And I just think that's one of the coolest things. Now, another pro about that, pro and a con, is this got essentially the European, or the American tuning of this inline 6-cylinder engine. So it's a little down on power because it has a cat, right?
Yeah, so you could, in the world, these came with cats and without cats. And with cats, I think they were down about 30, 40 horsepower versus the ones with the catalytic converters. And that's all we got here in the States, and that's just like this one is. So if you are able to find one of those ones without the catalytic converter, they're pretty potent little machines.
Yeah, so this car is right around 100, 185 horsepower, something like that. But the big pro of that is that if you live in a county like we do here in Colorado, where you have to bring your vehicle through emissions, this thing drove through emissions no problem, which is fantastic. So we've got plates for an emissions county.
Well, and speaking of exhaust, I really like how they weren't so worried like they are today about making everything symmetrical in the back, right? This exhaust is actually just off-centered a little bit, and it really gives it a unique design that you don't see nowadays.
And the cool thing too about this car is that the M package gave you not only the bumpers, right, but like you got these kind of smoke tail lights, which is factory. You've got the M badging, which is factory. You've got this little lip spoiler here in the rear, which is such a fantastic little addition. And the paint on this car, as far as I know, is fully original. All the panel gaps line up nicely. when the door is closed. It just is a really clean example of this car.
Yeah, and think about it compared to the M5, right? 90% of the people out there aren't going to be able to distinguish this driving down the road versus an M5. But you can get this for like half the price of an M5. So you can drive something that looks just as cool, and a lot of people are going to think you have an M5 for half the price.
Now, bringing this back to kind of the whole purpose of this video, BMW, I really think, needs to go back to a design language similar to this vehicle, because it's just fantastic. The proportions are right. The way it kind of sits in the road, size-wise, is probably similar to like a modern-day 3 Series, so it's a pretty good size as well.
I don't know. I think this would be smaller than a 3 Series nowadays. This might be closer to the 2 Series, Tommy.
You might be right, but it's very compact in its design. It looks great. You want to pop the hood, Brendan?
Sure.
We'll talk about the engine. Now, of course, the M5 would have had either an M88 in Europe or the S38 here in the States, which is an M engine with individual throttle bodies, right? And it was really the pinnacle of what BMW had back in the day. This does not have the full-blown M engine. This is a 3.5 liter inline six, like we talked about, 180 horsepower. So not a huge amount of power, but this engine runs fantastically.
Yeah, this thing does run really good. And, you know, a lot of these 5 Series you can find for pretty cheap, believe it or not, but they're kind of ragged out, they're kind of rough, haven't been very well maintained. So to find one in this kind of condition is super rare.
Yeah, and it's got the original suspension, right? It's got all the original warning stickers. There's the color, Diamond Schwarz metallic there. It hasn't been over polished in here, but it's been well maintained. So there's a funny story about this car. The guy who imported it and bought it from Japan thought it was an M5. So he paid ridiculous money for it, and then when it got to the States, he realized it wasn't an M5, it was an M535. And this car has a pretty tremendously complicated braking system, and he completely overhauled it at like the cost of $5,000 to overhaul the braking system on this car.
Holy cow.
Yeah, and it had some other deferred maintenance that he took care of. But mechanically, I think this car is about as good as it gets. And here, Brendan, I'll let you take the camera. We'll show one of the big changes, one of the few modifications that have happened to this car on the inside, right? So you want to hop through the passenger side there. So in Japan, it was very common to buy even your performance vehicle with an automatic transmission, and that's exactly what this car had, but this has been converted professionally to a 5-speed manual from the time. Now, the guy who did this is a gentleman named Mark Hutto. He's just fantastic. He's truly a wizard when it comes to these kind of things. And it's been professionally done, so it's got new clutch in it, right? It's been really, really thoroughly converted. You would never know that this thing was at one time an automatic. There's really no way to tell. And it feels amazing. We put this little M-style shifter here that would look similar to the original one that would have been on this car. But even the inside of these cars really are fantastic. Now, of course, new BMWs, they have got a lot more features, but the overall design and the simplicity of how this interior works is great. Everything is very mechanical. Everything is easy to access. It all falls to hand beautifully. And I love how the whole dash is kind of tilted toward the driver here. What do you think, Brendan?
Yeah, I think it's really cool. And the other thing that I do think is interesting is how is this work? It seems like you've got, so you can control how much of it goes up, how much of it goes to the center, and then how much of it goes to the floor. So can you have like all three going at the same time?
Yeah, you've got infinite adjustability to the airflow. That's exactly right. And then you also have little Celsius numbers there on the dial to kind of dial in your temperature configuration.
Yeah, and I mean, you give this nice little, because you didn't have airbags, right? So you get a nice little storage hole here for you can put your things. And then these seats too are actually really, really nice because you do have, you know, a little, how do you extend the...
It's a little bolster, yeah, it's an extendable bolster.
But you do have a little extender bolster here for someone with longer legs. Mm-hmm. These do tilt. I think these have lumbar too, don't they?
They've got all these, so the other nice thing about being a Japanese car versus like an American M5 is that these are fully manual seats, which is kind of desirable as I understand it. So you have like that bolster, which you talked about, but then all of this controls lean and the to and fro. Now, one issue with this car when you talk about is this is very common in these E28s, but the driver's seat does lean a little bit to the right, and the passenger seat does lean a little bit to the left, and we did have these seats redone as well.
Well, they're just trying to have you meet in the middle because you want to be a little cozy with your passenger, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's very drivable, right? But it is like, it's hard to see in camera, but there's like a little bit of a tilt. Now, the seats were pretty shabby when we bought this car. So we had them done with this suede material and then this premium material on the outside with the white piping, and then we kept the original M stripes there in the middle of the seat, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and then even though these things are super small, the back seat space isn't bad. Like, I'm 5'9", a little bit bigger of a guy, and my knees don't touch the seat that you have adjusted to your driving position. So you could sit comfortably back here for a long trip, and you get your own ashtray.
So your kids can smoke, of course. That's ideal.
Yeah.
Yep, that's very, very true. Yeah, it's got a good, comfortable rear seat. Now, as we come along to the rear here, we can take a look at the trunk. Of course, it's got a manual trunk lid, pushing on the button. Now, this vehicle, it does have a power antenna that works, but the power antenna will drain the battery, even the new one after we put it in. So there's a manual disconnect under the hood to, I mean, it won't drain overnight. You got to let it sit for quite some time before it'll drain, but we wanted to put that in there just so that if you like let it sit for like a couple months or a few weeks.
Well, something else that needs to be mentioned too is BMWs were focused towards enthusiasts, right? And enthusiasts would work on their own cars. So BMW gave you your own toolkit right on the rear trunk lid to be able to work on your own car.
Yeah, and you got like spare bulbs in there, right? Basic stuff that you can fix, and then it just screws back together just like that when you're done looking at it. So that was a really nice feature, you're right, Brendan. So overall, this car is extremely clean. There's a couple of condition things we should talk about. We talked about the original paint. You got a little bit of clear coat fade right here along the trunk lid, and then you do have some chips and the like here in the front, so you can see that's been filled in with some touch-up paint, and there's a couple little chips here and there, but we'd rather have the original paint than kind of go through and make it perfect.
Well, and the other thing too is these aren't the factory wheels, right? These are BBS wheels, which some may actually prefer because BBS is a German manufacturer of wheels, and they're known to make some of the best racing wheels on the planet.
Well, the reason it has BBS wheels is actually funny. It has the original spare, but I've been told by some BMW folks that it's actually impossible to get tire sizes in that original size.
Oh.
It's almost impossible, so that's why it has BBS. At least that's what I've been told.
Well, there you go. So you can actually get tires for it.
You can actually get tires for it. Well, Brendan, here, you want to hold the camera?
Yeah.
Let's hop on in and we'll take it for a little bit of a spin, and we'll show you how it drives, because that really is the magic of these cars. Now, compared to the newer BMWs, it's going to be pretty darn slow. It doesn't have nearly the same horsepower of even some of the more entry-level models. But that's not here. I can take the camera so you can put your seatbelt on.
Okay.
But what BMW managed to do in this era is a perfect compromise of comfort and driving pleasure, which is something you never ever find in today's newer models. It's amazing how comfortable but yet sporty this experience is, and also how easy it is to drive this car.
Absolutely. Yeah, as far as 80s cars go, these things are just super comfortable, and the way that it hugs the turns, it's kind of hard to parallel, at least as far as anything of that time goes.
Now, we do have this computer up here, which shows you all we got some dogs.
The cutest dogs out there
Look at those
stopping
puppies.
us on the road.
They want to come say hi, I think.
See, they're drawn to it too.
They're big BMW fans. Yeah, that's pretty funny. So this computer, we can see, still functions. However, the engine oil level sensor, I'm told, is faulty. So that stays on. It does have engine oil. It's up to snuff, right? It's clean, but it does display there permanently. And then we also have this little computer here. You want to show that? Where you can see stuff like the range, the consumption, and it's all in kilometers an hour and metric units, because of course this is a what's the word?
Japanese market
Japanese
vehicle.
market vehicle. Even the gauges, right? Those are in kilometers an hour. The mileage on this car, 191,000 K, which is like what, 120,000 miles or so, which is pretty low. A couple wear items, like it does have a crack or two in the dash, but overall the dash condition, it's pretty darn good.
It is good. I mean, especially here in Colorado, we tend to see a lot of dashes that have been sitting out in the sun for too long and have lots of cracks in them. So to find one this old and this nice of shape is pretty nice to see, actually.
Kind of unusual, yeah. And the engine is such a little gem. So it's a little bit lumpy at idle, but the second you get it off idle, it is so incredibly smooth, and it revs up beautifully towards redline. I think this was what, the M20 straight 6 is the code, M30. What that means is that it makes all of its power, 4, 5, even 6,000 RPM, and that's where this engine's happiest, is bringing it all the way up to redline here, even putting it up a hill. when you give it all she has, it really revs out nicely.
Man, that sounds so good.
And it's so smooth too. So it's not a particularly fast engine, especially by modern standards, but the way that it builds in its RPM is just incredible.
Yeah, and I think BMW can owe its reputation even to this day as an enthusiast vehicle to cars like this because they were so engaging to drive. And the sound of that straight six is just, it's so nice, honestly.
Yeah.
I'd say it rivals like 911s and whatnot, honestly.
And the steering is so alive too. Now it's a little bit of a slow rack compared to modern day standards, but you get a ton of feedback, and especially with this cool little M-Technic wheel, it feels great. You got these little buttons for your horn. Basically everything in here works apart from that little pressure sensor, but like heat works, AC works, the windows go down, right? It's just a really, really usable, drivable car. You got real seatbelts, you got real headrests, so you feel pretty safe. Yeah, this is the heyday of BMW, and this is where they need to come back to.
Yeah, and I know when we were showing underneath the hood, you'd see an engine that there's plenty of room to work on it, right?
Yep.
And there's not a ton of plastic components. So they really are built to be a much more reliable and serviceable vehicle for the long term.
Well guys, thank you so much for watching this video. And Brendan, if folks want to bid on this exact car, where can they find it?
They can find it at TFLbids.com because it is live right now. Auction ends in a few days, so if you want to own this classic, now's the time.
All right, we'll see you on the next episode, guys.